A few years ago, when my daughter was 3, I decided to go back to school and become a nurse. My husband and I were in no way trying for a baby whatsoever. I was on birth control, and we were very careful. I walk into our preschool one day to find the director and her teachers telling me congratulations with big smiles on their faces. I used to work as a preschool teacher here, so a lot of these people were close friends of mine. I ask them what they're congratulating me for, and they tell me that my daughter announced to everyone that mommy has a little sister in her tummy. I laughed it off and told them all I was sorry to disappoint them, but that just wasn't true. My daughter and I went home and talked about it. I told her mommy didn't have a baby in her tummy, and she just kept pointing at my belly and saying, "Yes, you do," as if I was lying to her. A few days later, I wake up to someone touching my belly. My daughter has the bottom of my shirt pulled up with her head resting on my belly while she rubs it gently and says, "Baby sister, what are you doing hiding in there?" It was really sweet, and I just assumed she really wanted a little sister. She had never expressed any interest in having a sibling prior to this, and we never discussed it. We had the talk again, and she got upset with me and told me that she has seen her before and that she is in there. She told me that her little sister looks different than us and has blonde hair and blue eyes with, quote, little holes in her cheeks, aka dimples. My daughter, husband, and I all have very dark hair, chocolate brown eyes, and no dimples. I talked to her about wanting a sibling and tell her that when I finish school, we will try to give her a little brother or sister. Again, she's frustrated and yelling, "I already have a sister." I was expecting my period to start within the next week like clockwork. It didn't. I took a pregnancy test and just stared at that faint positive result for what felt like forever. I was completely in shock. I was on birth control, so I immediately called my OBGYN and they saw me the next day. It was estimated that I was 4 weeks and 6 days pregnant. I gave birth to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl with the sweetest dimples. This experience has always blown my mind. This would have been pretty remarkable if during that time period the girl even mentioned the idea of them having a kid. But the fact that she seemed to know that she was actually having another girl, as well as the fact that she was able to completely describe her facial features, is pretty remarkable. This is my glitch in the matrix experience that I have never been able to explain. In 1992, I was working my first job and moved into my first apartment in the Washington, D.C. area. I had some furniture my parents had given me, and I was looking for what else I could get to make the place look nice. I remember someone had given me a catalog from a company called Tiger Direct. One thing I liked was a wicker screen, which I decided to purchase. This was before online shopping was possible, so I cut out the order form from the back of the catalog, wrote down the part number, filled out a check for the amount, put it all in an envelope, put on a stamp, and dropped it in the mailbox. This was in the evening, so the mail would be picked up sometime the next day. I figured it would take 4 to 5 days for the letter to travel from DC to California, a few days to be processed, have the check deposited, have the check clear, have the item picked, packaged, and processed, and then another 5 or 6 days for it to be shipped back to me. It arrived the very next day. I was so shocked when I checked my mailbox, saw a package delivery form, and picked up the screen I ordered. There was no possible way that the company had even received it yet. In order for me to get the package so quickly, they would have literally had to process my order a week before I had even heard of this company or thought about a wicker screen. If you remember the old Roadrunner cartoons, it was just like when the coyote would drop an order form in the mailbox and a delivery guy would drive up on a scooter immediately with his package. I could never explain this, and although I told a couple of people about it, they laughed it off and assumed I was exaggerating how fast the delivery was. This happened to me and my dad around 2012. He and I were walking to our car at the shopping center after buying some things. Upon reaching the car, we saw that one looked identical to ours parked right beside it. Naturally, I didn't think anything of it. My dad grabbed his keys and pressed the unlock button. His car didn't unlock, but the one next to ours did. This car definitely wasn't ours as the license plate was different. Confused, he tried the key again. The car next to ours flashed, signaling that the button had been pressed. He then put the key in the door and tried to open it that way. Once again, it opened the other car. We then decided to wait for the other owner to arrive, which luckily didn't take longer than 10 minutes. He and my dad discussed the situation. This guy tried to unlock our car with his key, and it worked. But it didn't work on his own car. We exchanged keys and went our separate ways. We have no idea who that guy was, and we have never seen him before, but the fact that our keys somehow got swapped remains a mystery to this day. Although your initial reaction may have been that this was just some sort of a technological glitch, let me remind you that they pulled out the physical keys from the key fobs, and even those were switched. It would have been weird enough if this was just a technological glitch, but the idea that the keys actually moved between the two keychains is crazy. So, when I was around 12 or 13, I got my ears pierced, and my mom had gotten me these rose-shaped earrings. A few months later, my piercings ended up getting infected, so I had to let them heal back up and lost the rose earrings. Then, when I was around 15, because of unfortunate circumstances, I ended up moving out of the house I grew up in to a different one with my sister. After we'd gotten settled, we set up a desk in my room, and when I came back, I sat at my desk to go on my computer, and sitting on the desk right in front of my keyboard was one single rose earring. It was only the one earring, and it was also missing its back, but it was certainly the same earring. I asked my sister if she had put it there, as she was the only other person in the house, but she hadn't. I was so confused because it's not like it was on the floor, it was on my desk, and I had lost it in a completely different house years earlier. I still have no idea how it ended up there. Though I am a passively spiritual person, so going, I don't know, ghost or something, helps me not wonder about it. One summer in 2012, myself, my best friend Lawrence, his cousin Lucy, and her friend Haley were all riding on the back of a speedboat on this really dangerous and now banned attachment called a jet bob. It was essentially a blow-up jet ski attached by a cord which fit up to 4 people at once riding it. It was dangerous because when the wake throws the riders off, we all fall into the water and often crash into each other. On this particular ride, I remember being the second rider from the back, with Haley holding onto me from behind. After an exhilarating ride, we of course hit the wake too hard and all pile onto each other as we fall into the water. I remember Haley screaming and her knee ramming into my back. After a bit of struggle underwater, I resurfaced to find only Lawrence and Lucy treading the water. That's when I panicked, thinking Haley had been knocked out and is now drowning. The lake water is obviously too brown and muddy to see where she is. We all had life jackets on, except for her, as I could specifically recall her making some braggy comment about not needing one, and Lawrence's dad not noticing. I yelled to Lawrence and Lucy, "Where's Haley?" But before they could answer, I swim underwater, feeling around to find her. It's way too deep, and I don't feel her. I resurface again, crying now and lambasting Lawrence and Lucy for not being concerned. At first they laugh, thinking I'm making some joke, but when they realize I'm serious, they both inform me that Haley never came for the ride and that she's back at the shore with the other parents, cousins, and family friends. They're both giving me the weirdest of looks. I could not believe what I was hearing and felt as though they were gaslighting me. I eventually come around, realizing how messed up it would be for them to do that if our friend was actually with us and drowning. Lawrence's dad returns to us with the boat and also tells me that Haley wasn't with us. I was so perplexed for the remainder of the boat trip, remembering the conversation with her, but worst of all, still feeling a very real pain in my back where I felt her knee me. If I truly was at the very back of the jet bob without her behind me, how do I explain the back pain? I even asked if there was a bruising on my back afterwards, which there annoyingly wasn't. I was completely spooked to see Haley when we got back to the shore, but at the same time, very happy to see her alive and well. She denied ever being on the boat and insisted I was playing a really bad joke. This person seems to have remembered a lot of different details from before they got knocked off. They remember talking to Haley on the boat, they remember her getting on the blow-up jet ski, and they even remember her kicking her in the back when they were all falling into the water. I've been looking for a place to post this for a while. When I was a little younger, I had a band class with a bunch of my friends. Every day, the teacher would allow us to leave during the first few minutes to use the restroom or whatever else needed to be done. This was quite rare, so we would take the opportunity to hang out in the bathroom for a few minutes. Not really skipping, just wasting time. So one day, we're doing that exact thing. We all get to class and meet each other in the bathroom, which was a short walk from the room. When I arrive, everyone is already there and laughing about something. We stand against the wall like we do every day and talk for a little while, my friend constantly checking her watch to make sure we were still good on time. I think something important to note is that, unlike usual, no other girls from the class came in. Other than our voices, it was awfully quiet and almost still feeling without anyone else there. But obviously at the time I didn't note any of this because I was goofing around with my friends. We decide to leave and walk back up. This is when it starts getting strange. We knock on the door, which was surprisingly locked. The teacher would keep it open for people returning, and a guy I didn't recognize opened it up for us. We all stepped in and were greeted by my teacher's shocked and then disgusted face. She then proceeds to yell at us about how we think it's okay to skip her class and return in another period. I looked to all my friends who stared at me with the same confused face. One of them asked if this is some type of prank and explains how we just went to the restroom like we did every day. But the class that watched us silently wasn't her 7th, but 8th period. When I think it can't get any weirder, I hear a sudden gasp from behind and turn to my other friend, who showed us her watch. It was 3:09, but it had been 2 o'clock just seconds ago. We're kicked from her class with detention slips in hand and no explanation. We have talked about this moment again and again, even years later. We all agree that the absolute longest we could have been gone for was 5 minutes. My friend with the watch was even keeping track of time in the bathroom. So how had an hour passed without any of us realizing? Everyone I tell about this always comes up with something along the lines of, time flies when you're having fun. But even though I want the explanation to be that simple, I'm just not sure. I received this one on a YouTube comment in one of my previous videos, and I just had to throw it in here. Wait till you hear this. My dad told me this story. When I was about 4 months old, my parents had just rented a house from an old lady going through a divorce. One afternoon while my dad was at work, my mom put me down on the bed, swaddled in my baby blanket so she could have a nap. About an hour later, my mom woke up and didn't find me next to her. She looked next to the bed thinking I had fallen off but couldn't find me. She went from room to room frantically searching for me but just couldn't find me. She was searching for me in the living room when she looked out of the window and saw me wrapped in my blanket sitting outside in the middle of the road. My mom went to the front door but it was locked. She tried the kitchen door but it was also locked. She remembered she locked the doors and put the key under the pillow when we got to sleep. She rushed to the bedroom to grab the keys, ran outside, and scooped me up. She immediately packed our bags and called my grandma to pick her up. She never went back to that house, and 5 months later, my dad built us a new house. My mom doesn't like talking about this and doesn't like the fact that my dad told me. She's still unable to take an afternoon nap after all these years. I, of course, do not remember a thing. My uncle on my mother's side of the family died in 2015 on Christmas Day. I've always been a skeptical person regarding the afterlife, ghosts, and spirits. That is, until a short while after my uncle's passing. I was doing my hair in the bathroom, looking in the mirror, when I just had that gut feeling that you get when you know someone is looking at you. In my peripheral vision, I see my uncle in the crack of the door. I knew that if I fully turned to look at him, he would disappear, so I waited a moment until I turned to see him, and then he was gone. I told my mother about the experience and described what he was wearing. Cargo pants, plaid long sleeve button up, and it sounded exactly like something he would wear. An old friend told me this a few years ago. She wasn't the type of person to make stuff up, so I 100% believe her. She told me that her cousin and herself would often have sleepovers at each other's houses. They would set an alarm at 10 o'clock p.m. to play with toys during the night while they were meant to be sleeping. One of these nights, they were playing with Barbies. She said there were about 6 dolls in total, all scattered around the room, and hearing her mom come down the hallway. My friend and her cousin laid down in bed quickly and turned off all the lights before her mom came. Her mom opened the door for 5 seconds and then left. Thinking she had avoided being caught, turned on the light again, and somehow all the Barbies had moved positions. Originally, they were scattered around the room, but now they all sat neatly in a conga line in the middle of the room. She said her cousin also had no idea how this happened, and neither of them fell asleep during this. My friend used to tell me this story quite a lot, and I could tell it bothered her. When I was around 6 or 7, I found my mom's drawer that she kept jewelry in. There was a necklace in the drawer that she was given by her grandma, so it was very special to her. One day, being a stupid little kid, I took the necklace and brought it to school. For some reason, I thought it was a good idea to play hide the necklace at recess. It was not a good idea. I hid the necklace in the small grassy area of the playground. I had my friends try to find it, but we never did. I looked everywhere. I eventually started crying, knowing that I had lost it. The teachers even helped to look for it, but nobody ever found it. I went home and told my mom while crying. She was very upset at me, and I was in a lot of trouble. That's how I know I didn't imagine it, because even she remembers it being missing from the drawer. A few weeks later, I was again messing with her jewelry. Apparently I didn't learn my lesson, when I found the necklace. I just thought someone found it at the school and that she had picked it up. I never really asked about it until she asked me if I had found the necklace and returned it. I told her no, and that I thought she had found it. She told me that she did not, and she had no idea how it was in her drawer. It freaked both of us out, but especially my mom. She kind of brushed it off so she didn't have to think about how it got back in that drawer. A few months ago, I had a dance at my school that I was going to. My mom brought me a few items of her jewelry that she was going to let me wear to the dance. The necklace was one of the items. When I saw the necklace, the whole story came rushing back to me, and I freaked out even more. I reminded my mom of me losing the necklace and it randomly appearing, and she kind of shut me down, as if to say she didn't want to talk about it. I could tell it still makes her uncomfortable to this day. As a kid, I might not have questioned it, but now I was convinced something really strange happened with that necklace. When I was around 15, me and my best friend were at a small gathering with my older brother and his friends. At some point, we were playing a game where we were hiding and crawling in tall grass. After a while, I realized that my clothes were reeking of a smell which I can only describe as rotten fish. While chatting with my friend, we got talking about a distant cousin of mine who went to the same school that I did. We had not been close for a long while, and it was unusual that I had thought about him and spoken about him. The following day, I learned that he had been in a serious car accident that night and had lost his life. At the time, I had thought it was a coincidence, but then I got that fish smell again, and soon after, someone I knew lost their life. The stronger the smell, the closer the relative. This would happen to me now and again, and I always kept thinking that I was being ridiculous. A few years back, though, I smelled rotten fish the day before my birthday, and my distant uncle, who I really knew well and cared for, died a few days after an operation. 2 years ago, I suddenly got the fish smell again, and my wife, who was 4 months pregnant, had a miscarriage. I have spoken to my wife about this after the miscarriage, and she has been skeptical, which is no surprise. I'm skeptical of myself. Today, after being in an induced coma for 8 days, the son of a colleague died. In the morning, just before the time of death, I smelled the fish again. My wife was with me in the kitchen, and we were speaking about the kid. I told her that I got the smell of fish again, and we both understood that the kid would not make it. After driving to work, I learned that the kid had passed away around the time I smelled it. Has anyone ever experienced something similar? For some context, I had recently broken up with my girlfriend and had just gotten bored with spending every night alone. I downloaded some apps and eventually came across this girl named Leah. I swiped on her, gave her my number, and we started talking. We clicked really well, but after a few days, I just came right out and told her I didn't want anything serious. I asked if she just wanted to come over and spend the night. If it went really well, maybe we could be like friends with benefits or something. Not a smart thing, but I was lonely at the time. She said she also wasn't looking for anything serious and that this would be her first time with another girl. She agreed. I was home visiting my parents for the week and told them a girl was coming over. Both my parents work night shifts, so I'd have the house to myself. As they were getting ready, Leah arrived, and my parents greeted her quickly before leaving. Me and Leah have some drinks and order a pizza before going about our night. The next morning, I wake up and she's gone, which I find weird because the way that my bed is against the wall, she would have had to literally climb over me, and she didn't seem like the kind of person to just walk out the door first thing in the morning. I'm also a pretty light sleeper, so I don't know why I didn't wake up. I didn't think too much about it and just figured she had something to do in the morning, or maybe she just saw it as a one-night stand and didn't want it to be awkward. As I was getting breakfast and cleaning up, my dad comes home and asks why there's 2 of everything. Glasses, plates, etc. This confuses me, and I remind him how Leah had come over that night, and that he'd greeted her before leaving. My dad is adamant that that never happened and laughs it off. I know how long night shifts are, and how my dad doesn't have the best memory, so I shrug it off. When my mom comes home about an hour later, she asks how my night was, and I again bring up Leah in the movie that we watched. My mom is visibly confused and asks who Leah is. I say, the girl she met before heading out to her shift. My mom looks at me sternly and says that, at my age, I really shouldn't be lying. I tell her I'm not lying and that she literally met her last night. My mom says I never even looked up from my phone last night, let alone mentioned someone else was coming over. I'm confused and go to show my mom the conversation I had with Leah about her coming over, and I find nothing. I tried to find her Tinder profile, and nothing again. At this point, I'm freaking out, and I even try to find the footage from our doorbell camera of me letting her in. It was just me opening the door, looking into the dark, before closing it and coming back in. At this point, I'm freaked out and getting chills all over because I could have sworn she was there. Everything we did felt so real. I've never had an experience like this, and I've never been into paranormal things. I can't even begin to find a logical explanation besides me having some psychological break or something. I don't know, and I don't think I want to know. This happened when I was 18. I'm 20 now, and still terrified. I've never told anyone this, and I just wanted somewhere to put it. I mean, how could you just fake an entire night with someone who apparently wasn't even there? I guess the only real explanation here is that this was all a hallucination, but what are the chances that a perfectly healthy person hallucinates an entire night with somebody, all without having any prior history of hallucinating? I don't know what's scarier, the idea that Leah just popped out of existence, or the idea that we can't even trust our own sensory perceptions. I don't expect anyone to believe this, because if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't believe it either. I was around 10 or 11 years old, and my nuclear family lived in a newly built house in rural Indiana. I always had a hard time sleeping due to insomnia, and late one night, I got up to use the restroom. When I went around the corner of the door into the restroom, there was a small, human-like figure in the tub. He was like a little old man, all wrinkly and no more than 2 feet tall. When he saw me, he jumped behind the shower curtain, and I ran screaming the other direction. This woke my mother, and she just thought I must have been dreaming or saw some sort of animal because, of course, when she went back, there was nothing there. From then on, when I was walking down the hall, I always announced when I was going to the restroom to avoid any further encounters like this one. I would like to mention that I am a skeptic for sure, but I still do not know how to explain this. One evening, around late 2020, I was messing around in my family room. The family room connects to the dining room on one side and a hallway on the other side. I stopped whatever I was doing and I looked up and saw what I thought was my sister in the hallway. We can call her Brooke. She began walking down the hallway after I called her name. I thought maybe she didn't hear me, so I followed her and called her name again. I continued to follow her into the kitchen, then into the dining room, then back into the family room. It was like she just couldn't hear my voice or my footsteps. Maybe she was messing with me, I thought. She went back down the hall, all the way to the very end where the laundry room was. I watched her turn right into the laundry room, and I followed shortly after. My heart stopped when I realized Brooke wasn't in the laundry room. It was like she was, but then she wasn't. There was no way she could have left without me noticing. The room was small, and I was standing in the doorway. I searched all over that room, feeling uneasy and confused. I didn't even remember what I wanted to ask her anymore. I just wanted to figure out what the fuck was going on. I ran out of there, and I ran up the stairs. Brooke, my mom, and one of my other sisters were watching a movie the whole time. A few years ago, I was deployed to the Middle East while I was serving in the military. I worked the night shift, so I slept during the day. One day, when I was sleeping, I was suddenly woken up by a large boom that was loud and shook my bed and everything else in the room. I was the only one in my room at the time. My immediate thought was that we were under attack, so I quickly threw on my gear and ran out of the room. While in the hallway, I ran into another soldier who told me she didn't know what was going on. When I stepped outside, there was about a dozen people walking around like nothing had happened. I was very confused as it seemed like I was the only person who experienced it. I asked another soldier who was relaxing in a lawn chair if he had heard anything, and he told me that nothing had happened. At this point, I assumed it was nothing, and I went back to sleep. When I woke up later, I asked one of my roommates if he heard anything, to which he replied, no, he hadn't. By this point, I thought it was obvious that I was just dreaming or something. That is, until I was playing a video game with my friend later that day, and he asked me, "Did you hear that loud boom this morning?" Hearing his question shook me to my core, as he told me that no one around him heard it either. He was in his room, which was about a mile away from mine. He told me that he had brushed it off as well, but hearing me talk about it shook us both. We had talked to many people, but not one person ever recalled hearing or feeling the boom. The thing that's so wild about this is that the boom was so large that everyone should have remembered it. We both were surrounded by people and none of them recall anything. I would have just wrote it off as military activity nearby, but the fact that no one else heard it besides me and my friend still boggles my mind to this day. When I was 13 or 14, about 4 or 5 years ago, but I'm not sure exactly, I went to my cousin's house for a sleepover. We often did this, so neither his nor my parents had any objections. We often stayed up late if I was at his place, so we didn't sleep until around 1 or 2 a.m. We were watching videos and chatting in bed when the power suddenly went out. We decided that it was late anyway, so we got under the covers and went to sleep. A minute or two passes before my cousin tells me that there's someone in the room. I thought that it was another one of his stupid jokes, so I audibly said, "There's no one here, go to sleep." Though I was curious and slightly startled by his words, so I opened my eyes just a tiny bit, and there is someone in front of the balcony. You could see moonlight shining through the glass. At that moment, the moonlight was blocked by the silhouette of the person. After seeing that, I quietly tell my cousin that there's nothing there and that he should sleep. We laid there for around 10 minutes when the power comes back on. The person that stood there is gone. We didn't sleep until the sun rose, and we didn't tell anyone about the person. Fast forward to present day, I chat with my cousin about the thing we saw on the balcony that night, and he says that he'd ask his mom about it. The next day, he tells me what his mom told him. The man who lived there before my cousin's family had apparently himself on the balcony. When I was about 8 years old, I lived in a small house in a suburban area with my mom, my stepdad, and my stepbrother, who was only 11 months younger. At this time, my stepdad had been taking an engineering course, and my mother would stay home to take care of me and my brother while my dad studied during the day. One day, me and my mom were getting ready to go out. I wasn't quite sure what for, but I assumed we were leaving to go pick up my stepbrother from his biological mom's place, which wasn't too far away from where we were located at the time. Right before we left the house, I told my mom that I had forgotten my teddy in my room and that I had to go back to get it. She said that was fine, and she would be waiting by the car for me, so remember to shut the door. When I walked back to the door after retrieving my teddy from inside, my stepdad was waiting next to it. I thought nothing of it and smiled, greeting him with a, "Hi, Dad," and he smiled back. He asked me where I was going, and I told him just out with Mom. He nodded and moved aside from the door. I said bye to him, then closed the door and entered the car. Once we started driving, my mother asked me, "What took you so long?" And I replied honestly, saying, "I was just talking to Dad." The atmosphere changed, and she suddenly became very concerned. She asked me what I meant by that, and I told her in detail how I just finished talking to my father about where we were going and I had to say bye first. She nervously replied by informing me that we were actually going to pick up my dad from his course and that I couldn't have spoken to him. I was extremely confused knowing that I'd definitely spoken to him and explained to her very upset that I know I saw him. When we picked up my dad, she told him what happened. He walked into the house first while me and my mom waited in the car. We didn't stay at the house that night. We lived there for another 3 years after this incident, but in the following years, there were multiple almost paranormal experiences that we still can't explain. To this day, I don't know who I spoke to or how I managed to speak to them, but it creeps me the F out knowing it wasn't my actual dad. I'm sure you guys have realized by now, but I get sent a disturbing number of these doppelganger stories. I didn't used to think about this too much, but I've literally been sent like hundreds of these doppelganger stories directly. Why the f is this happening to so many different people? It just blows my mind. I usually work from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., so my sleep schedule is a bit shifted from the average person's. Last week, I overslept, so I didn't have time to do anything before getting ready for work. While I was getting dressed, I realized my room was a mess and needed to be picked up. I told myself I'd do it tomorrow before work. My shift goes completely normally, but when I come home, my room is completely picked up. My small trash can has been emptied, laundry has been organized, and my bed was made. The weirdest part was that my bed was made differently than how I usually make it. Pillow arrangement, etc. I go to my roommate's bedroom to see if she's still awake. She is, so I ask if she'd clean my room for me, but she says no, and asked why I was asking. I tell her that someone must have because it was messy when I left and it's now clean. She comes with me to see for herself, and my room looks exactly the way it did before I left for work. She asked me if I was joking, and I didn't even know what to say. She thinks I might have hallucinated it from being tired from work, but I slept a solid 10 hours and was only at work for about 8. I felt perfectly fine. Very bizarre incident. I am a down-to-earth person who firmly disbelieves in the supernatural and anything that revolves around humans being able to perceive things that they can't know about. However, I recently noticed a pattern in my life. For as long as I can remember, I have been able to see the future through my dreams. That might sound corny, but I would like to elaborate on the types of dreams I've had. Like anyone who can distinguish between normal dreams and nightmares, I believe that there is a third category: premonitory dreams. These dreams vary from simply seeing myself in 5 to 10 years in the future to being able to predict someone's death. I want to focus on the latter as it is the most remarkable one for me. It happened on June 28th, 2022. I had a dream where I was in a decrepit and flooded city, treading through the water on a horse. I was alone, and there was nobody else in that moment of my dream. As I was riding my horse through the ruined city, I saw a bridge that was above me. There, I saw the sister of my grandmother, whom I hadn't seen since I was 7. I'm now 18. I hadn't talked to her or heard anyone mention her since the last time I saw her. My unconscious would have no reason to bring her up in my sleep. This is where it took an uncanny turn. I saw her above me, standing on that bridge, but her facial expression seemed like she wasn't paying attention to me on purpose, but was rather staring at the crumbling city behind me. The horse I was on led me under the bridge. When we came to the opposite side of the bridge, I looked behind me, and she simply vanished. I instantly woke up in horror and in a cold sweat when I realized what that succession of very symbolic events meant. It was around 7 in the morning when I woke up and heard my mom in the kitchen making coffee, so I went and sat down and started telling her exactly about the contents of the strange vision I had. When I finished my story, my mother tried to come up with a few explanations for what I saw, but I was dead set on the meaning of that dream. As soon as I woke up from these disturbing visions, I instantly knew what every element symbolized. In the case of what I was talking about, it simply meant that my grandmother had died. We shrugged it off, but several minutes later, as we were still eating breakfast, my mother's phone started ringing. It was our relatives. Her mom's sister, at 6 o'clock that morning, had died. My mother just put the phone down and looked at me, and we were both equally shocked, not just because of an unexpected death, but because not 15 minutes ago, I was saying that exact same person who we hadn't talked to for over 10 years had died in my dream. When I talked about it to our family members after the funeral, we agreed that before her soul left this world to join the afterlife, she was allowed to see one last person. It might sound a little creepy, but I try to see it from a positive light, and that after we die, our souls are allowed to go visit one last person before bidding farewell to this world. Since that encounter, I haven't had another premonitory dream. About 2 years ago, I had a really bad nightmare. I remember I was about to by jumping off a building. I remember seeing the ground below and how real it felt. The odd thing about it is that I was live streaming it and there were comments telling me to do it. After what felt like forever, I jumped. The second I jumped, I woke up immediately. I was sweating, shaking, and just scared. It felt so real. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake that nightmare from my head. Fast forward a few months later, I was watching a video about a young girl. Out of respect, I won't say her name, so I'll just call her Girl A. Girl A was someone who used to make videos and live streams. All she wanted was to be well known and make friends online. Unfortunately, she dealt with constant bullying and harassment that made her decide to just end it. She decided to by jumping off a building while live streaming. Hearing that made my heart drop and immediately reminded me about the nightmare that I had. I just tried to shrug it off as some sort of coincidence, but dread overtook me as the video showed a screenshot of the live stream. The screenshot looked exactly like what I had seen in my nightmare. I never saw the video before, nor have I ever heard of Girl A before, so why did it feel like I was just watching my nightmare right before my eyes? Questions started swirling around in my head, wondering how the hell I dreamt about her from her point of view. Even in her live stream, there were comments telling her to do it. She unfortunately did jump. Watching that video had me terrified and questioning everything. I just hope she's resting easy and in peace. I was a very strange kid, so I didn't have many friends. Home life wasn't the best, so I was always outside instead, but I'd get bored. My favorite thing to do was walk over to the cemetery we lived near and just wander through it and hang out there. There was a little cluster of graves in the far back corner down a small hill. They were hidden away and clearly not maintained like the rest of the cemetery. I happened to stumble upon it one day while wandering by myself. Looking at the graves, I noticed one that was the grave of a child. I don't remember the last name, but the first name was definitely David, and it was a 4-year-old. I was always very empathetic, and it made me sad that it was just a little boy and he'd been forgotten about. I was just drawn to it, so I started going to visit specifically this grave every day. I would just sit there a while and talk to this kid. Eventually, I started even bringing small toys with me that I didn't play with anymore, and I would leave them for him. Think like toys you would get from Happy Meals and stuff. I did this every single day that I could from about age 7 until I was probably 12. After that, I think I went to see him once when I was 13, but not again until this next part of the story. Years later, when I was 17 or 18, I decided to go back for the first time just because it had been so long and I felt a little bad. I found my way back to that hidden section and that grave just isn't there anymore. I vividly remember exactly what it looked like. It was a unique gravestone. It was like a round cylinder-shaped grave, and it was that classic reddish grave color. There's no grave there anymore that looks anything like that in the slightest. There's no David there. There aren't even any child graves there, just adults. It looks exactly the same as the last time I was there. My first thought was that maybe it was moved for whatever reason, but there isn't any sign that the area had been touched in years. It's just as not maintained and obviously forgotten looking as the last time I visited. It makes no sense to me. I visited that kid every day for 5 whole years, talked with him like a friend. I left my toys there for him, yet somehow now he just doesn't exist. I would write it off as maybe my mind making it up, but it isn't just me. I actually took my old best friend there at least once during our few sleepovers, and they remember it. They were with me when I went back and couldn't find it, and they could describe what the grave looked like to me without any of my own input. What gets me a little more, this grave also happened to have the Star of David on it as well. I didn't know what that was as a kid, and of course I was curious, so I copied it down while I was there one day and showed it to my grandma to ask what it was, which she remembers me doing. I was just telling her about the fact that I visited this grave as a kid and had went back and didn't find it. She brought up herself that I had talked to her about it as a kid. I am 100% certain there was a 4-year-old boy named David in that forgotten section of the cemetery, but now he's just gone.